is episode number 17 of the Sports Consiglieres podcast. My name is Jim Whalen. Along with me is my co-host, Jerry Calla. A lot has been talked about Pete Rose and the Bait Hall of Fame and his career. My next guest grew up in Cincinnati. I believe he grew up a Cincinnati Reds fan. He just wrote a book, Charlie Hustle, The Rise and Fall of Pete Rose and the Last Days of Baseball. It's proud to introduce our next guest to the podcast, Keith O'Brien. Keith, thank you for the show. And I halfway through the book, really detailed, and thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. So
thanks for having me, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Ironically, Jerry and I are Giants fans, so we're kind of skip football talk. So we try to change gears with baseball talk. But are you a Cincinnati Bengals fan growing up in Cincinnati? Or?
Yeah. I mean, born and raised in Cincinnati. I live in New England now and have for many years. But, probably just like you, it's hard to shed your allegiances that you had when you were 11 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, ironically, I guess 2 days ago, Pete Rose tried to he petitioned the Hall of Fame again to try to get in. He's 81 years old. This is probably the last ditch effort. I mean, do you believe he should be in? He should be not going to after writing this book, Charlie Hustle.
So he's 83 and
he's 83. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think he's petitioned. He's petitioning Major League Baseball to be reinstated.
Okay.
If he were to be reinstated, then by the rules of the Hall of Fame, he could appear on the ballot. I mean, listen, we could talk about this particular question all day, all night. It is, I think, one of the great late night sports bar arguments. I think it's important to point out a couple things that I think most people have forgotten. And that is when Pete Rose accepted his banishment, and to be clear, he did accept and sign an agreement accepting his banishment in August 1989. He did so fully believing that his name would appear on the ballot 2 years later in 1991, which would have been 5 years after his last at bat as a player. There was no rule in place at the time that restricted him from appearing on the ballot in 1991. It was only later, in February 1991, so about a year and a half after he accepted his banishment, that the Hall of Fame changed the rules. And the board at the Hall of Fame voted that only eligible players, only players in good standing could appear on the ballot. It was effectively the first time in the 60-year history at that time of the Hall of Fame that they pre-screened a player out of the pool of potential candidates. And even the voters, the baseball writers who had no intention of voting for Pete Rose, who were going to vote no on Pete, were livid because the Hall had taken the power out of the hands of the voters and made a vote impossible. And listen, Sparky Anderson, the Hall of Fame manager, Pete Rose's manager with the Reds, also Pete Rose's friend, made a lot of mistakes, I think, in the course of Pete's career. Pete had a lot of people aiding and abetting him throughout the 1970s and 80s before this ultimate crisis happened. I do believe Sparky Anderson was one of those people. But Sparky said in February 1991 something I think is absolutely true. He was interviewed that week that they changed the rules, and Sparky said that it was a tremendous mistake, and that by removing the possibility of voting on Pete, we were ensuring that this controversy would loom over baseball forever. And here we are, 35 years later. The three of us are still talking about it. Still talking about sports talk radio, still talking about it. And I think that debate is frankly not good for baseball. But back to your original question. One of the things that makes my book, I think, unique is that I'm not here to make a case for Pete Rose. I'm not here to make a case against Pete Rose. I wanted to lay out Pete Rose's story, which is a story unlike any other in American sports history. Lay that out in granular detail with reporting that never had been done before, and then let people, the readers, the fans, come to their own conclusions. But, like you, of course, I have my own personal feelings, and my feelings about the Hall of Fame are this. I think we've lost perspective. We like to put players on pedestals. We like to ascribe to them moral values that they may or may not deserve, that they may or may not have. And the fact is, we know very little about the athletes we cheer for. And so for those reasons, I think we need to look at what players have done on the field between the lines when voting on them. If what they have done on the field within the lines is enough, then I believe they should be voted in. And if what they've done off the field is so egregious, so wrong, then let's put it on the plaque at Cooperstown. Let's enshrine those mistakes right next to their accomplishments.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well said, Keith. And I think for Pete Rose, I mean, first of all, the book is very detail oriented. I know you went through FBI files, you did your research on it, and you actually, I think, interviewed Pete Rose, I guess, about 27 hours of dialogue. So, I mean, the story is, and I have bits and pieces of it, but the story is really intriguing story just about Pete Rose himself. Like, he really was undersized, wasn't fast enough, but he just outworked everybody, and the Charlie Hustle name is really just fit him. And then I don't want to take any of my time, Jerry. I know you're chomping at the bit here. I know talking to Keith. So
no, Keith, listen, that was like Jimmy said, that was very, very well stated. I mean, I remember, I'm a Yankee fan, and there's really not much as a kid, if you will, that caught my eye outside of the Yankee spectrum, if you will. And Pete Rose was definitely one of those players. I remember collecting the Sports Illustrated covers, as that was unfolding. And I would never have guessed, from the early 90s that in 2024, we would still be talking about this, because he is a polarizing figure. It's a great story. I think what gets lost as time has gone on is, I mean, could we say that, Giamatti, he's no longer with us, but Giamatti, did him dirty with the agreement? Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, there's a lot of Pete Rose defenders and Cincinnati Reds fans who have long been angry about Giamatti, have long been angry about John Dowd, the special counsel and investigator that Giamatti hired to investigate Pete Rose. And I will say that some of those feelings still persist today, especially in Cincinnati. I would push back, however, on the notion that Giamatti, to use his terms, did Pete dirty. One thing I think we've forgotten, and we've forgotten a great many things about the Pete Rose scandal, is that this was bad for baseball in 1981. Yeah. Just like the Shohei Ohtani scandal involving his interpreter was really bad for baseball earlier this year. Yeah. The Pete Rose scandal was the worst possible situation for Major League Baseball at a time when Bart Giamatti was just taking over as commissioner. Nobody, including Giamatti or John Dowd, wanted this to be true. The fact is, it was true. And then Pete Rose lied about his decisions and his choices for 15 years, and in some ways is still, I think, lying today about what happened back in the 1980s. I believe, based on my reporting, that Giamatti had no agenda here. But once they found what they found, they were hemmed in by their own rules, their own regulations. And, there is something, of course, that Pete remains angry about. And maybe this is something you're suggesting there, Jerry. What he signed in that document in August 1999 said that there'd be no official finding about what he had done. No official finding related to the gambling. And, that morning on national TV, Giamatti holds a press conference. He holds it there in New York at the Statler Hilton Hotel. Yep. It's a scene you can scarcely imagine in 2024, a commissioner of a major American sport holding a press conference on live television and then taking questions from the press on live TV for almost an hour. I mean, you can't even get access to commissioners today for one or two questions. Yeah. He's doing this on live national TV, and they've signed this agreement where it says there'll be no official finding. But one of the first questions that Giamatti gets from the press is, well, did he do it? Did he bet on baseball? And Giamatti pauses and he says, based on his reading of the Dowd report, based on his understanding of the facts, that he believes he did bet on baseball. And Pete considered that a violation of the terms of the agreement. But the fact is, there was nothing in the agreement that Giamatti and Rose signed that prevented him, Dowd, Faye Vincent, or anyone else from sharing their personal opinions about what they thought was true. And again, the fact is, Pete was betting on baseball. He just chose to lie about that for another 15 years.
Yeah. And you highlight in the book, I guess, September 8, 1985, the 9-minute applause. And I guess for the first time, everybody looked at Pete Rose as this rough and tough person, but he was kind of humanized then in that 9 minutes. And he did it in Cincinnati. Just talk a little bit about how you mentioned that in the book. And being from Cincinnati, how is that reflected to the fans?
Yeah, so you're talking about the night that Pete Rose set the all-time hit record.
Correct.
It was this week, guys. 39 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
34 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
He sets the all-time hit record at Riverfront Stadium, a sellout crowd. Again, in a moment we can hardly imagine today, the networks across the country stop regularly scheduled programming to carry the at-bat live, breaking into coverage. People are watching in bars across America, in department stores, on televisions that are set up there. And Pete Rose does what he does. He gets that little looping line drive single to left center field and round second base. And as you said, the standing ovation lasts for 7, 8, 9 minutes, just goes on and on. And in that moment, Pete, this guy who's created this crusty exterior that no one can pierce, breaks down, and he begins to cry on first base. And it's really, even to this day, one of the only times, we've seen that kind of emotion from a man who really made his reputation as someone who was rough and tough and wouldn't bend to anyone.
Yeah, again, Keith, that was, like you said, that was the time that, a lot of people today, younger generation, wouldn't understand. Cutting networks cutting into that, a looping single, Carmelo Martinez, I believe, fielded the ball, Rose, as he did for many, many, many at-bats and hits, runs hard to first, rounds first. It was an unbelievable, moment. And I guess, back to my last question to you is, I think the Pete Rose apologist, if you will, they have portrayed, and I'm glad that you kind of really broke that down and detailed that. They want Giamatti to be the enemy. They want Giamatti to be the person, hold Giamatti the person responsible for him not being in the Hall of Fame. And I think as we have moved away, in this situation, that's clear that that's not the case. And I think a lot of people have a big problem with the fact, not so much what he did, it's that he lied about it, and it took him a long time. Now I know at autograph shows, for an extra $10 on top of his autograph, he will sign, "I did in fact bet on baseball." So that's where I think it starts. And by the way, not for anything, as you know, Keith, his autograph shows to this day, his line is the longest, put him up against anybody, including up in Cooperstown, which is fascinating.
Yeah, agreed on all of that, and you're right. There are those, to use your term, the Pete Rose apologists, who have that point of view. I think it's important to say one other thing about Giamatti. Based on my reporting, this story could have gone differently if Pete had made different decisions, even in 1989. There is, based on my reporting, a secret meeting that happens in the front offices of Major League Baseball in late February 1989, involving Pete Rose, his lawyers, Bart Giamatti, the outgoing commissioner of baseball, Peter Ueberroth, and Bart Giamatti's right-hand man and deputy commissioner, Faye Vincent. And in this meeting that they've called, they want to ask Rose a simple question: has he bet on baseball? They want to ask this question because they have heard a rumor that Sports Illustrated is investigating Rose for that particular crime. And so they asked him point blank in the office that day, "Have you done it?" And Faye Vincent told me that He denied it categorically, and actually said, according to Faye Vincent's memory, I wouldn't be that stupid. And the thing about it, I think, is compelling is these men, Uberoth, Giamatti, Vincent, all believe him. They believe Pete Rose. He's believable. He's charming. Of course, he couldn't be that stupid. But they can't take Rose's word for it because, Sports Illustrated is circling in the shadows, preparing this story. So that's when they go and hire John Dowd to dig up their own set of facts and learn what they can learn so they're not caught flat-footed by Sports Illustrated's investigation. And, if Rose is honest that day in the office, I think it goes differently. If Rose is honest later that spring during a secret deposition held in the basement of a Catholic church in Dayton, Ohio, it goes differently. They did not want to have to banish from the game forever one of the game's biggest stars, biggest names, most beloved heroes. If Pete had given them another path, they would have taken it. But there was no other path as Pete entrenched himself and refused to admit what the facts bore out as being true.
I mean, if Keith, this is just your opinion, if this happened, well, obviously gambling is legal today, but before it was legal, you think it happened in later circumstances, you think the outcome would have been different? In 1989, everything was kind of, fact based. You think that if it happened later on, like the discovery happened later on, and maybe in mid-90s, I was betting on baseball, things would have been different, or you think the outcome would have been the same?
Well, it's a good question. I think there's a couple things that are important to know about that. I mean, obviously, 1989. We're still in the Reagan era of morality in America. Bart Giamatti was an idealist. He did not apologize for that. And I think that's a credit to him. He was not going to tolerate this kind of behavior. Might have it been tolerated or buried by another commissioner? Perhaps. Yeah. But again, the media was on to this story. Whether baseball was going to dig into it or not, Sports Illustrated was getting to the nut of the truth. And that was going to hold baseball's feet to the fire here. I think the better question is, what are we going to do when it happens next? Because it is going to happen. We've seen in just this year a flurry of sports gambling scandals involving players themselves. The names involved haven't been the big names. But I think inevitably, as gambling continues to sweep across America and becomes the norm for a new generation of young Americans.
Absolutely. Right.
I think it is inevitable that we have a major scandal involving a big name player betting on his own games. And that, I think, is going to be interesting. Do we have the stomach in 2024, 2025 and beyond to ban forever a big star when everyone, millions and millions of people, are gambling on their phones every day, and gambling has become a commonplace practice across the country? I don't believe we do, to be honest with you. And I think, honestly, in some ways, the investigation around Shohei Ohtani's interpreter earlier this year bears that out. I mean, listen, Shohei Ohtani has denied any involvement in the gambling that his interpreter Ippei Mizuhara participated in. The investigation has found no connection to Shohei Ohtani whatsoever. That said, I believe as a journalist, there are holes in this story that you could drive a battleship through, and no one, least of all Major League Baseball, seems interested in finding out more.
That is 100%. I agree with that 100%. And like you said, 2024, where you had a brief conversation where you're getting a new generation coming up. I don't want to cast negativity on new generations, but the new generation doesn't want to watch a 9-inning baseball game. Maybe we'll go to 7 innings. Now, what would this generation do with a enormous figure like Ohtani? and like you said, they don't, that, like you said, the loopholes, there's holes in there. There's a lot of, things that probably it's like anything else. You run the course of the investigation. Sometimes investigators hit the brakes because they don't want to go any further. But like you said, now, could you imagine in 2024 what an Ohtani ban would do to Major League Baseball? It would crush it. And I think out of all the major sports, in my opinion, you look at the NFL. The NFL is flourishing in different ways. Baseball is, I still think trying to, the NFL is connecting fantasy, gambling. It's really connecting a little bit more with the generation coming up, and baseball is really trying to do that. And I agree. I don't think in 2024 that would happen. And you look at Rose, and people wanted to get negative on Faye Vincent, but like you said, Faye Vincent was in all of those meetings. He had, like you said, numerous opportunities in the commissioner's office, in the church. So I think Faye Vincent, had to toe the line, with what basically happened. He wasn't going to lift any ban. And now you come fast forward with Manfred. I think when he kind of took over, people thought this was one of the things that he was going to do right away as the commissioner. But then I think he looks into the case and sees, the way the chips fell, and that kind of, fell on deaf ears, so to speak. So my question to you is, first of all, I don't think Major League Baseball in 20 years, in 5 years, in 20 months is ready for, this to happen. And it will happen. There will be a major player somewhere along the line. But my question for you is, in Cincinnati, was there this hope when Manfred took over that he was going to cast the magic, the magic wand, and Pete was going to be reinstated? Because there was a lot of buildup that was going to happen.
Absolutely, there was, and Rose, made impassioned cases for his reinstatement both in 2004 and then again in 2014, 2015. And I think he came close, honestly, a couple times. But the real issue is that there's more, underneath the hood of this car than just, betting on baseball. In 2024, and as I document, clearly in my book, Charlie Hustle, you've got affairs with women. You've got acknowledged affairs with at least one teenage girl in Cincinnati. There's even questions about how much he's willing to admit about his gambling, based on my reporting and interviews with people who placed his bets on baseball, including one of his close friends at the time, Mike Bertolini. Pete Rose's betting on baseball begins in 1986, while he is still a player with the Cincinnati Reds, not just a manager, but a player. Again, there are notes that were kept by his good friend Mike Bertolini, a New Yorker, that show, according to Bertolini's notebook, that bets were being placed in 1986. Pete won't acknowledge that. He remains steadfast that his gambling on baseball begins after the 1986 season ends, during the postseason when the Reds have been eliminated. And I think, just in a bigger way, guys, he's never done what we want our heroes to do when they fall. We want, our fallen heroes to go on a show like yours, or go on, in an interview with Oprah Winfrey and cry and shed tears and admit all the ways they were wrong. And, that's what we want, for better or for worse. Pete Rose cannot do that. It is not how he is built. It is not how he is wired. He simply will not apologize in the way that we want folks to apologize. And I think for those reasons, and the sweeping changes in the legalization of gambling, and what that reveals about the inconsistencies, I guess, in this policy, I don't think we're going to see him reinstated anytime soon, not while he's alive anyway.
No, I agree with that. I think at some point, way, way, way down the road, I think the Pete Rose situation, the steroid era players, if you will be addressed, but not anytime soon. That's my opinion, because I think that, like you said, going forward, they have to remove these clouds at some point. How that's going to happen, I have no idea. But like you said, Pete Rose, and you're a Cincinnati guy, is never going anywhere on any show admitting and breaking down. And like you said, that's what baseball would want. That's what we want, and that's never going to happen.
And I didn't get to this part in the book yet, Keith, but like, how did Major League Baseball find out about his gambling effort? I mean, obviously back then, gambling's behind the scenes, bookmakers, somebody had to get, quarter pinched in order to, or somebody had a roll on somebody else. How did they get the smoking gun with Pete Rose? I didn't get to that part in the book. I apologize, but I really enjoyed the book so far. So.
Well, the key to me was a federal investigation. In the mid 1980s, 2-3 years before this explodes onto the scene with national headlines about Pete Rose's gambling, Pete is running with a group of guys in Cincinnati who are getting in all kinds of trouble. These are men that were sometimes square in the middle of his inner circle and sometimes on the fringes of his inner circle. And, they were distributing steroids. They were distributing cocaine and doing it out of a very popular gym in Cincinnati that was frequented by Pete Rose and by members of the Cincinnati Bengals at this time. It was a hot gym that people wanted to attend and be a part of. And so these men pop up onto the radar of the FBI in Cincinnati. One by one, they get picked up by the FBI, and they begin to turn on one another, cooperating with the feds. And, as it sort of gets closer and closer, you can almost feel the walls closing in around Pete. But, perhaps not surprisingly, he's blissfully unaware of that fact. And, as I said before, I try to do reporting here that had never been done before and tell a story that had never been told before in a way we'd never read it. And one of the keys to doing that was obtaining the federal court records, not just to Pete Rose's, lawsuit against Bart Giamatti in baseball, but the criminal records related to the federal cases that were built against the men in Pete Rose's inner circle. I tracked down those files, spent days scanning them at the clerk's office at the federal court in Columbus, Ohio. And it was really there in that clerk's office that I could feel this story coming together. And so because of that federal investigation, multiple people go down. One of them, tips off Sports Illustrated to what's happening. Sports Illustrated begins to dig in, and that leads to the secret meeting that I mentioned before, which goes well for Pete. But, because Giamatti and Vincent in particular know that they can't sit on their hands while the Bible of sports in those days, Sports Illustrated, is digging into this investigation of Pete's gambling, they hired John Dowd, and that's really how it all comes to pass.
Now, Keith, in the course of all this, have you spoken with, not even teammates, because I know there's like him and Bench have a thing, but guys that played for him? Because if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on this, I believe years ago, second baseman Ron Oster said that he never saw signs, I guess, of decision-making being influenced, outside of the norm of the way Pete Rose would manage a game. Can you elaborate on that, please?
So, yeah, I interviewed for the book hundreds of people, including dozens of players, people that Pete played with and against, and certainly people that he managed, and yeah, the popular answer and the prevailing answer that his players will give is that they're that there were no signs. They saw nothing different. And Pete himself will say the same thing. As you mentioned before, I did 27 hours of interviews with Pete Rose for this book until he stopped calling me back, until he shut down. And while I had access to Rose, the way he described it was, listen, I was cheering for my team to win. I want to win every night. I was putting a little money on it to make it more interesting. There are scant few written records of the gambling. There is, as I mentioned before, notes from a notebook that Mike Bertolini, his close friend, kept from the 1986 season. And then there are some notes that another associate kept from the 1987 season that were part of John Dowd's investigation and part of the Dowd report. And so it's difficult to take those that very small sample of games and try to figure out, was he managing any differently? Whether he was or not, it is obviously wrong to place wagers on your own contests, especially, as the manager. You can overuse a pitcher. You could keep your closer in a little longer. You could, change the outcome in that way in order to win your bet. And obviously, more dangerously is the other possibility. And while there is no evidence, whatsoever that Pete Rose ever changed the outcome of a game to throw the game, no evidence whatsoever. The possibility, of course, was there. Based on my reporting, Pete Rose was greatly in debt to bookies in the 1980s. Obviously, as we all know, there are ways for bookies to collect money. And one of those ways is to go to a player and ask them to change the outcome of the game in order to get even. It did not happen based on my reporting with Pete Rose, but he sure seemed to be putting himself in a situation where it could have.
Yeah. And getting back to just him as a player, I mean, the Big Red Machine, I think he's too much of a competitor kind of to lose. I mean, going back to the All-Star game when he broke Fosse's or where he damaged, the head first slide in the All-Star game in which 50 million people were watching, you documented in the book, which is like, mind blowing now. But like the teams that he was on, the Big Red Machine probably goes down as one of the best teams ever assembled in baseball. And also, I think one thing that bothered him was the Reds won that 1990 World Series. That was his team. And he was also a player manager. So he's a unique individual in that sense. But I just think betting on baseball, he was just too much of a competitor to have that happen. So just hit on a couple of those points about the Big Red Machine, the All-Star game, and then the 1990s season, if you can.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we have forgotten why we ever cared about Pete Rose in the first place. I think even Cincinnatians, even baseball fans have forgotten why we ever cared about Pete Rose. And the fact is, you cannot write the story of baseball in the second half of the 20th century without him. He is there on the field and off the field in the biggest stories and games of the era. There's a reason why we're still talking about him today. It's not just because of the scandal. It's because of who he was, what he meant to the game, and what he meant to fans. And, people loved the way he played. I think you're right. Based on what I know about him, it seems highly unlikely, if not impossible, that he would have thrown a game because all he ever wanted to do was win. And he did that, sometimes, to the detriment of other players. You mentioned the Ray Fosse collision at home plate at the All-Star game 1970. This collision, which I think is one of these moments where two players literally collide and then are forever changed. Pete for the good, and Ray Fosse for the ill. Fosse is never the same as a player that season. I think you can make an argument that he's never really the same again. We tend to look back at that collision at home plate in 1970 and think that must be some kind of evidence of a character flaw in Pete Rose. Why would a player hit another player like that in an exhibition game? But that was not how it was seen at the time. And that was fascinating for me to go back through the newspaper coverage and the radio and television coverage of that collision and see how differently it was considered in 1970. After the collision that night, yes, there are players in both locker rooms who think that Pete went too far, that it was unnecessary to slide into a man like that in an all-star game. But all of the managers involved in the game that night, future Hall of Famers, Earl Weaver, Gil Hodges,
Leo DeRocha,
Pete Rose's teammate Joe Torre, all defend Rose for that play. That was how guys were expected to play the game in 1970, and no one played it in a more consummate way than Pete Rose did.
Right, and I think too now it's truly an exhibition game. Back then, you had a little bit of league pride. Guys went at it a little bit differently. I mean, you can make that case about like the NBA All-Star game. I mean, so that's definitely a great point, because I think, like you said, there's probably a few guys that are like, he went too far. This is an All-Star game, but it's just a different time. And the other thing is him throwing games. I think that's like the justification, if you will, for the Rose apologists, that, well, he bet on the Reds, that showed you how much he really wants to win. But like you said, let's say every fifth day, Mario Soto, Tom Browning, whoever's out there, and he's leaving that particular player in, another 20, 30 pitches, whatever, for 15, 20 starts a year, you're basically altering a guy's career. I mean, that's one thing Billy Martin proved about running pitchers into the ground. So, I mean, I think that's an easy, that's like kind of like a cheap cop out by the Rose apologists. Oh, he didn't throw games. That's how much he wanted to win. He wanted, he was really a competitor. He wanted the Reds to even win even more. So, I mean, that being said, where do you think we are in this sense that baseball will not reinstate Pete Rose? However, they have proven the All-Star game, when it's convenient for them, they will bring him back and prop him up, just like when they honored him. What is your opinion on that?
So, I mean, in 2024 and beyond, in the world we're living in today, the last thing that baseball wants is to reinstate Pete Rose, have him potentially elected in the Hall of Fame, and then stand there in Cooperstown and rub everyone's noses in it and remind everyone of the inconsistencies, in between the past and today, a time when Major League Baseball is embracing legalized gambling. It's just not going to happen. And, I want to defend baseball in the sense that it would be folly for baseball or any other league, economic folly, not to embrace the legalization of gambling. I mean, it has changed the way we talk about sports. It's changed the way we consume sports. There are, entire shows built around gambling now.
Yeah, viewership. I mean, more people are watching now because they're betting on the game. So.
Yeah, but you can't have one of sports' most notorious gamblers, then being inducted into the Hall of Fame, in that time and place. But I think inevitably he will be reinstated, even if it's posthumously. And then I think it's interesting. I don't know that he would even get in, honestly, if he was reinstated.
Yeah.
He may find himself just like the Barry Bondses and Roger
Right.
Clemens of the world, coming
Yeah.
up short, time and again. But as Sparky Anderson said way back in 1991, once we removed him from the pool of potential candidates, we ensured that this hypothetical conversation would be happening forever, looming over the game.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, writers now, I think if you had to put odds on it, so to speak, I think it's 50-50 if they would vote him in. I don't think it would be overwhelmingly one way or the other, but I think he'd have a tough time getting in. That's my opinion.
But even like during in the weekend, he was out there signing balls up in Cooperstown a block away. So it's just like he's almost putting it in their face too. So that was like, yeah. But I think that was this type of personality. He just put it in your face. All right, you don't want me here? I'm here anyway. I'll do what I have to do.
Well, yeah, and he gets paid, very well for those autograph appearances, and the crowds, are, despite all of the many scandals and all of the things we've discussed here today, the crowds are still enormous.
Yeah.
He's got long lines at his autograph shows everywhere he appears, and I think that to me is sort of the more powerful part of the book. I didn't write this book, to delve into the Hall of Fame debate. If you read it, you'll find that it's handled in just a couple pages at the end of the book where it should be handled. This book to me is about, one of the most extraordinary, controversial, polarizing, and yes, beloved American athletes who's lived a life unlike any other American athlete. And as a result of that, has legions of foes and legions of fans. And I think regardless of how people feel about Pete Rose, whether you like him or dislike him, whether you ever rooted for him or never did, whether you watched him play or never got to see him on a diamond, I think this is a compelling human story that people can appreciate and enjoy.
Well, I know we're getting to the end of it, Keith. I just want to thank you for your time. Jerry had the last point, but before I pass it over to him, I just want to say, thanks. And you have anything you're promoting, book signings or with the book, or you working on anything that you want to promote coming up, and also how's the book doing?
Book's doing great. I mean, it was an instant New York Times bestseller, which is incredibly gratifying, and continues to connect, with readers, baseball fans. I'll say, anyone who wants a signed copy, you can get them through my local bookstore here in New Hampshire, where I live.
Okay.
It's called Water Street Books. You can purchase your signed copies through the store. Anyone who does purchase a signed copy will also get a free Charlie Hustle bookmark as well. So you can read all of your books going forward with Pete Rose, as you should.
So, Jerry, I'll kick it to you. You can close it out, and I'll just close it. But
well, Keith, listen, thank you again so much for joining us. This was a welcomed subject matter, if you will. The last few episodes, we've been diving heavy into the Giants, so that's a whole nother story. But again, just for our viewers, it's Charlie Hustle, Keith O'Brien, who was graciously joined us today. The rise and fall of Pete Rose and the last glory days of baseball. One of the most polarizing figures probably in all of sports. A great read, and this was a great conversation. So, Keith, again, thanks for joining us. We'd like to talk to you in the future. This is Jimmy and Jerry signing off, everyone. And have a great day. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Keith. Good luck with the book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.